Next up, it is time for the IANA Transition panel. And so it's going to be myself and Ron and Milton, and the others on the stage can escape for a moment if you wish. You can stay up here if you want. The panel's myself and Milton and, right, there's room for everyone. Okay, so I'm going to start off. We're going to talk about the IANA stewardship transition. And this is an interesting topic. As I've said earlier today, the IANA is something that has been done under the auspices of the U.S. government. The U.S. government has had a contract for some time. NTIA in the Department of Commerce has had a contract with ICANN since its formation for ICANN to provide IANA number services. And about 2 years ago, the Department of Commerce issued a statement saying that they would be willing to transition their role, the role of the stewardship over this, to the global internet community, and instead have the global internet community, each affected community, arrange itself for providing the IANA numbering services it relies on. I'm going to talk about one piece of that. I'm going to talk about, with respect to numbers, the registries that we just heard about. I'm going to talk about the arrangement that will exist between the RIRs and ICANN at the point in time when it's no longer being done under the IANA functions contract from NTIA. So this is going to be the IANA Numbering Services SLA presentation. And let me just do the quick introduction. So the SLA for the IANA Numbering Services Agreement for the provision of IANA registry services for the global number resource registries. This is the top level registries, the free pools held by the IANA of IPv4, IPv6, and the ASN registries. The principles by which this agreement was written were actually specified by the CRISP team. The CRISP team we heard about earlier, it was the consolidated RIR team that was responsible for proposing the plan of the transition. Not only did they propose a plan, but they also gave us principles to be used in drafting this agreement. And each of the regions had 3 representatives, and they came up with this plan that is part of what's being submitted to the U.S. government. So, presuming that plan's adopted, we'll need to have an agreement that matches the requirements. And the requirements called for an agreement between the IANA numbering services operator and the 5 RIRs. The 5 RIRs jointly would contract for an IANA services operator who would maintain these central registries. Now, ICANN has done an excellent job to date. We don't have a lot of requests. We have a handful of requests every year, and they do a great job, as you can see by their satisfaction reports we just heard about. The CRISP team proposal called for the IANA, based on its performance and for stability, to be the IANA numbering services operator. So we've been working, the 5 RIRs have been working with ICANN for a contract to continue to provide these services under the RIR contract as opposed to under the NTIA contract. So the drafting was done by the RIR legal team. We had appointees from all the team, coordinated with the CRISP team to review the work to see if we were matching it appropriately. Public comment periods were done after each draft. Now, the plan was actually done, the CRISP team plan was done by January 15th, 2015. So we actually had the first draft in May of last year, had a second draft in August, had a third draft in October. Each one of these had a public call for comments. Each one was posted to the mailing list, the IANA discussion mailing list. We're up to our 5th draft. 5th draft was released on 18th of March. And ICANN actually worked with us on the last few drafts, getting them closer to their expectations. And the final version is imminent. Like, I hit refresh before I stood up here. It's still not out. But today or tomorrow, we should have the final version, meaning we're satisfied with it, ICANN's satisfied with it. It's not significantly different, actually, from the 5th draft, so people shouldn't be surprised. But this has been a very public, very incremental process. Let's talk about what's in the proposed SLA. It's a 5-year agreement with automatic renewal. So the RIRs, by default, have a 5-year agreement with ICANN as the IANA numbering services operator for ICANN to maintain these registries. Something you should know, I'll say it only once here, just to, the IETF has a similar relationship They have an MOU that they want to enhance with ICANN for ICANN to provide the service to their 2,000 registries that they have. The IETF has a lot of protocols. Protocols have registries. They have a lot of them. So we have our 6 registries, and the IETF has its handful. The names community is organized within ICANN, has ICANN help coordinate that, has ICANN doing the IANA function. So it turns out we have one body doing all of this. It's problematic. So they actually asked that ICANN break off the IANA team into a separate wholly owned affiliate, and that will be called the PTI, the Post-Transition IANA. And the PTI is actually what the names community is contracting with to get names via ICANN, contracting with PTI to do its registries. The RIRs are going to contract with ICANN, and ICANN we're going to let subcontract with PTI because it's wholly owned. It's not really a big difference. But I just want to say we actually have an agreement with ICANN specifically. We'll have a right not to renew. If we decide that we want to have another operator, we can, within 12 months of the as long as we give more than 12 months, we can let them know we're not renewing. It has that might be something to go for if we decided we wanted a different performance or we wanted some other operator. By default, it does renew automatically. Everything's going smooth, we let it just keep going smooth. It has a right of terminate that doesn't require getting to the end of the term. You can terminate because you need to terminate for failure to perform. And there's a whole process for discussing lack of performance and escalating lack of performance and having senior discussions about lack of performance and having mediation and having arbitration. But the fact is, if there's non-performance, there's a right to terminate. There's obligations for best efforts and cooperation in transition to a successor. If, no matter why we're leaving, if we're moving to another provider, the IANA numbering services operator will be obligated to facilitate that transition. Even if we're leaving, they have to facilitate the transition. This contract was written in a way generically. We wrote it as the contract we want to use for the IANA number service operator, regardless of who it is. But on the other hand, ICANN has been doing a great job, and ICANN was very helpful in working on this agreement. And so it's fortuitous, because the same contract we're going to use with ICANN, if we ever did have to use someone else, would be very easy to do. The agreement looks to be signed in the May-June timeframe. Well, other parties on the panel will talk about that a little bit. There's a language in it that says we're going to sign it, but it won't do anything. I love contracts like this. You sign it and it doesn't do anything. The term is condition precedent, and what it says, until this condition is met, the paper has no effect. It's meaningless. The condition in this case is ICANN released from its NTIA IANA functions contract. So when it's released from doing it under the contract with the US government, then the contract is in full force, and they're then doing the same function only under the contract with the RIRs. Okay, that's it. I'm going to hold questions, actually, because we've got two more panelists. We get to the end, we can do all the questions at once. So, Ron and Milton, what order? You want to come up here, or you want to do it from there?
All right, so I can control the slides with this? All right. So why are these people smiling? Well, the first reason is that this was taken before they did all the work to develop the transition proposal. The second reason is that this could be considered a constitutional convention, the Declaration of Independence, kind of, if you want to use an American analogy, meeting in Philadelphia in 1776 and deciding to actually separate the internet and its governance from the United States government's sort of legacy control, if you will, over the IANA functions. Now, this process was very complicated, and John gave you a great deal of detail about the numbers part of this, and I'm going to try to give you the bigger picture. So you had actually two groups. This is what was called the ICG, or the IANA Stewardship Coordination Group, and it included ultimately 30 members from the different parts of the community, including names, numbers, and protocols. And one of the smartest decisions they made was to break down the process of developing this transition proposal into 3 distinct parts. So they said to the numbers people, you form your own committee, which turned out to be CRISP, and you tell us what you want done with the numbers IANA, the numbers parts of the IANA. And they told the names IANA to develop their own proposal as to what to do with the root zone of the DNS. And the protocols IANA, of course, was somewhat autonomous to begin with, but still had to formalize it, so the IETF working group, IANA plan, was in charge of that process. Now, everybody realized that the special U.S. government role was not really a technical part of the thing, but it was more of an accountability check, and many people were nervous about turning ICANN completely loose. So in addition to the transition, the stewardship transition over IANA, there was a recognition that there had to be major accountability reforms in ICANN itself. Primarily ICANN as DNS policymaker, but some of the functions of ICANN extend into numbers quite a bit, although they have less directly to do with protocols. So you have 2 distinct committees working on that. The cross-community working group on enhancing ICANN accountability consisted of 5 different members from each ICANN supporting organization and advisory committee, and basically turned into or evolved into a fairly open working group in which people would join in the discussion as individual participants. Now, of course, you could have predicted that of these 3 distinct proposals, I'll ask you all to guess which one took the longest, was the most complicated, and most contentious. Names, yes, you got it. No doubt about that. So when we say that this proposal was finally turned in as complete on March 10th, 2016, you remember John telling you that the CRISP proposal was pretty much ready in January of 2015, and the IANA plan proposal was also ready by mid-January 2015. So the rest of that time was consumed by the accountability reforms of ICANN itself. And that was a very interesting process. I won't go into the details about the structure, but essentially they created what's called an empowered community, which has a number of enumerated powers over ICANN, such as removing individual board members, firing the entire board, approving fundamental changes in the bylaws, and other kinds of conditions and certain other enumerated powers. And another important part of this accountability reform was to limit and define the mission of ICANN in a fairly narrow fashion so that ICANN is not supposed to stray from that mission. And they created an appeals process which is more effective and more accessible than the last one. So now the question is, we sort of have the proposal finished. It's been sent from ICANN to the NTIA, the U.S. Department of Commerce. Actually, what we're doing now is we have lawyers working on drafting bylaws that reflect the exact intent of the proposal drafters. And of course, this can be very tricky, because if you draft this legal language wrong, you might create rights, obligations, or processes that have unintended consequences. So this process, again, is dragging on a bit as there are debates and discussions about how well the language is being translated into the actual bylaws that will be adopted by ICANN. Now this was the bylaw. I started preparing this presentation last week. This schedule is now obsolete. It has been pushed back at least a week, I think. But as you see, we were supposed to be done with the drafting of the bylaws by tomorrow, and they were supposed to be posted on the 20th of April. I think we're going to miss that deadline, maybe, maybe not. I've been looking at the list today, and we're still shooting some documents around and getting some approvals from various constituencies and working groups. But in effect, we are on track to give the NTIA something close to that 6-month lead time that they said they needed to vet the proposal and get it approved by the various agencies of the U.S. government. So hopefully somewhere in the week of April 20th or 25th, we will be seeing that final set of bylaws posted, and I would encourage you to look at that if you have an interest in this historic change in the ICANN environment, and provide your public comments about what you think, how well this reflects a proposal. If there is any need for further modifications of the bylaws, that will take place near the end of May. And then the ICANN board will finally approve these bylaws, and that will then go into this review by and approval by the U.S. government. Now, as you know, people who were not completely, well, there's a little bit of partisanship in the U.S. government, so the transition was seen as an Obama administration initiative, and so the people who were in the other party wanted Congress to have some kind of an approval authority over this transition. So they passed this law as a budget rider, which prevented the NTIA from actually relinquishing its contractual control until the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th, which is when the extended contract is supposed to end anyway. And in the meantime, after they get those final bylaws, the NTIA will look at the proposal, see if it meets its criteria. It will then have to probably go through some more congressional hearings. The first round of hearings, which occurred immediately after the Marrakech meeting in March, were very positive. Not a lot of determined opposition, but there are still some rumblings among what I would call nationalist Republicans who are asking why we are giving up control of the internet, why this might create risks that ISIS will take over the world, or whether the Russians or the Chinese will control the internet. Yes, they really are getting questions like that. I'm not making this up. So I'm not sure how serious or substantial those objections are, but there are still, you know, some forms of opposition. So with that, I will turn it over to Ron.
Good, thanks, Milton. I am Ron De Silva. For those that I haven't met yet, I am Group Vice President at Time Warner Cable, responsible for network engineering and architecture. I am also on the ICANN Board of Directors, and it's in that capacity that I'm here with you today. I want to come back to this. I know there was a similar slide earlier, but why is ICANN here? I thought I'd talk to that question by borrowing this slide. And when John Curran talked about the 5 regional registries coming together to form the NRO, this unincorporated body, one thing they do is they appoint 15 members into this number council. And for John Sweeting, he was confused, and I don't see him, so it must be golfing. In the ICANN bylaws, there's defined this address serving organization. So what the NRO does is, with this number council, it fulfills what's described in the ICANN bylaws. That's why there are 2 different terms to describe basically the same function. NRO coming together to identify what resources they want to apply, and then with the MOU between the RIRs and ICANN, they satisfy what's described in the ICANN bylaws as the ASO. And a very important thing, I might be biased, but a very important thing that the NRO NC in fulfilling the ASO AC function is they appoint 2 of the ICANN board members. And these are your 3 lovely members of the NRO on behalf of the ARIN region. And how that fits into the overall board structure of ICANN is as follows. This beautiful, diverse picture of the board, maybe it's reflective, I don't know. There is geographic diversity, there's some gender diversity, there's definitely some ethnic diversity, so the colors may be appropriate, I don't know. But really what they mean here is the orange people on here are placed by the nominating committee, and these folks can be from anywhere in industry or outside of industry. And really, the nominating committee each year looks to add diversity and also fill in gaps in whatever the current composition of the board of directors has. So we have Lucevi sits here, also on the ICANN board. She's one of these orange people. Ironically, you're wearing orange, and you're Dutch. But I don't think the other 7 are Dutch. So that said, then each of the supporting organizations, they're listed there in the next column. If you look at this chart and follow with me left to right, the 2 yellow people, I guess I'm yellow, are seats 9 and 10, and they are appointed by what I just described in the NRO NC. And that would be yours truly and Kowe. And the AC, the SOSE or the NRO NC is currently looking to fulfill the 10th seat obligation. Quo is stepping down, so he won't be seeking another term, and there's obviously some discussions and a process around how they're going to make that selection. I think you heard about that already. And then the other 2 serving organizations, the green people and the blue people there, are the country code folks and then the general names folks. And then one other one is the at-large. So really, if you take the 8 plus those 7, so 8 orange people, 6 down the middle, and that 1 blue guy, that's 15 voting members of the board. That's really the meat of the board. And if you add to that our CEO, we have 16 folks who are authorized to make decisions on behalf of the board. In addition to those 16, we have 4 liaisons that are appointed from various bodies. The Government Advisory Committee within ICANN has a representative on the board as liaison, and the Root Server Advisory Committee and the Security and Stability Committee. Each of those have additional seats, and then lastly, the IETF has a seat. So all that, 20 folks. I was practicing some of this at lunch with Kathy. I hope it's now more clear. Yes? Good. A quick shout out to the rest of the ICANN folks that are here. So I mentioned Lucevi's. Albert, I don't think, has shown up. He was registered but didn't show. Joe's over here, and Alon is over yonder. And you just heard from Selena on the IANA update. So why ICANN? I get this question. Why in the world would a numbers guy want to subjugate himself to lots and lots of names-related policy and activity? And for me, it just personally, it seemed like the right thing to do. I spent 6 years here in this community on the advisory council. I chaired it, vice chaired it a number of those years. From 2010 until the middle of last summer, I was on the ASO as a representative of this community, and in that capacity was able to see what the global policy development process is like for the numbers folks. Prior to that in the AC, definitely helped shepherd through a lot of the policy here in this region. So a natural segue for me when I learned Ray Polzak was stepping down and it was vacating seat number 9, I stood and raised my hand and said, look, I'd be interested in doing this. I think I bring some unique perspective, not only being in this community active in the policy development process, but then also in my day job, in my professional capacity as an executive at a service provider and private industry. There's a lot of other things that I can bring that's unique and different than the rest of the population of the current board. So conveniently I agreed, and here I am. Now, what I wanted to get out of it, I was very interested in, okay, I understand what happens in the number space. What do these names people do? How do they, in fact, implement and identify and pursue their policy process around names. And then those 5 years that I was on the ASO, there was also a little bit of a selfish interest in here. I got to go to a few of the ICANN meetings, and it was actually quite delightful going as a numbers guy to an ICANN meeting, because the content, if you look at it, some of it is interesting. Which meant if I'm in some new interesting city, I could go, take an afternoon, maybe play golf with John. He's still not here. And or get a little tourism in, or a little shopping, and see the local culture and enjoy some of the local cuisine. And so in my fantasy, I was thinking, oh, this is great. Joining the board means I'll go to all 3 of the ICANN meetings every year, and I'll get to see all kinds of interesting places and enjoy all kinds of different pieces of culture that perhaps I wouldn't see otherwise. This is my schedule from Marrakesh. So I took out all my personal stuff, and this was just a little bit of work that survived, and all the board-related things that were going on through the week. So as you can see, it started far left there. Wednesday arriving before the meeting even started, and then leaving Friday at the end of the week. Nevertheless, I didn't really see anything in Marrakesh other than the inside of conference rooms, and every night got on a bus and went to some random restaurant where I had the same food I had the night before. Tagine is great, like one night. Second night, it's okay. By the 6th or 7th night, I really didn't want it anymore. So yeah, why ICANN? But let me talk a little bit about, since Dublin, what's happened. And TNID is really a reference to the social in Dublin. That night in Dublin was this great experience that the ICANN meeting coordinators put together. We had several of the bars set aside in the Temple District, and you can kind of wander from bar to bar. And there was a number of folks, a number of folks that eventually convened later that evening in the Temple Bar, and we had a great time having our own little party there. But since Dublin, that's when I was officially put onto the board. A few things that have happened. First, that's Jordan Marby. I don't know if you haven't had a chance to meet him yet or have seen him. This is our new CEO. He officially begins, I think, next month. He's on board and learning and training and whatnot, but will be in his official capacity starting in May. So coming in October, we had a lot of extra meetings, a lot of extra phone calls, a number of face-to-face interviews. We had to narrow down the list, and the board had to decide on a final candidate, and then negotiate an agreement to get Jorn to join and convince him to leave Sweden and come to LA. Another interesting activity, which you heard somewhat from here in the panel, is the CCWG, but I thought I'd provide a little board perspective on what that was like, because for me it was 2 to 3 hour calls 2 or 3 times a week at all kinds of squirrely times of the day, gazillions of emails with no practical way to stay on top of those and also still have my day job functioning, and it kind of went on, and then there was this interesting dynamic between the community really wanting to drive the process, and the community really wanting to own it and be responsible for all the content, and yet a desire to have the board chime in from once periodically. So every time the board would speak up, we'd get criticized about meddling in the process. But then if we don't speak up, we get criticized for not adding an opinion. So this was kind of a bizarre dynamic that lasted through until we got the transition documents done in Marrakesh. I've also joined the finance committee. This is particularly interesting to me. I love talking numbers. I do quite a bit of it in my day job. And just broad intro to ICANN. They have some 350 people spread all over the world. Majority of them focused on helping with the names policy development process, and burn through $120 to $150 million a year on fulfilling their purpose. Now, for the CCWG piece of that, there was some $25 million so far that have been spent to develop a couple of emails. And most of that was kind of split between legal fees from various parties involved, and travel support and meeting support, translation support, documentation support, all that stuff sort of adds up. Think about it. I think ARIN probably spent $250,000 to have this meeting, right? So think of having 100 of these meetings. That's the order of magnitude of expense that was spent creating some email. And yeah, a couple of other items. So what else have I been doing? On the board, we've been looking to kind of assign different roles and different areas of oversight for each of the board members. And one thing I've glommed onto is really in an area that prior wasn't really comfortable or was a bit foreign to me, and that is in government policy development. So that took me to New York for the WSIS meeting, and I've been trolling all the IGF activities. Have jumped into the human rights stuff just in time to hear this renewed interest in sexual harassment policy and all this stuff out of Marrakesh, and then one of the things I was able to do, I think, supporting the numbers community is in Marrakesh, was able to draw a little extra attention around getting SLA moved forward, so that was good to see happening. And then lastly, I think Milton talked about the bylaws. I'm part of the bylaws drafting team, which means I get to read yet more emails and more documents. So all that, so that on March 10th, Steve Crocker can send an email. That's all I have.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So we've got time for questions, and got about 20 minutes for any questions on IANA stewardship transition, ICANN, the relations between the parties, NTIA. A room full of experts. That's awesome, actually. That's great. Oh, okay. Go, Sean.
Yeah, thank you. This is Sean. I'm not talking about transition here. I just want to thank Ron for the presentation. I think it's a very good report. And I would like to ask that the board members representing the IRs consider visiting each of the IRs once in a while to give these updates, and for the IRs in the different regions to also meet the ICANN board members from representing them. Thank you.
I'm sorry, repeat that last part slowly. I didn't hear the last sentence.
Okay, so the last sentence is, it would be good for board members representing the IRs to visit the other IRs.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, most certainly. Thank you. And we do a bit of that. We strike a fine balance, actually, between how much time we spend visiting other RIRs, because obviously if all of us visits all of the other RIRs, then we incur 5x costs that we don't want to incur. But for example, I've attended many of the other RIR meetings, and the ARIN board makes it a point to have a board member, often two, at most of the other RIR board meetings. And we welcome them. We welcome people to our board meetings as well. So I think it is important. ARIN's practice with respect to the advisory council is the advisory council asks if they could send two people from the AC to each RIR meeting to track developments, and we've supported that in the budget since that was their request. So we have pretty good cross-pollination, and we welcome the other RIRs to send their people this way. Okay, excellent. Questions about IANA stewardship transition? Oh, you got one down the end. Go ahead. Oh yeah, Ron.
Doesn't light up? Okay. I was waiting for it to light. So on the request about the board participating, there's actually, I'm surprised you didn't talk about this, between ICANN and the RIRs, or specifically the NRO, there's an intentional effort now to get on the plenary at the ICANN meetings an opportunity for the regional registries to have part of the plenary to talk about what's happening. And then conversely, at the RIR meetings, since joining, I've been trying to ensure we've got participation by at least some board member at all the registry meetings. So Quo and Asha were at the APNIC meeting. Luciviz and I are here. Lido should be at the LACNIC meeting. I think George is going to show up at the meeting in Botswana. And I think we had a couple of people lined up for Copenhagen. So yeah, we're trying to do that, and I think starting to see some success and having reciprocal time on both meetings.
On.
Alain Durand from ICANN. So I'm not from the board, I'm from ICANN staff. And this year I made a point to go to all the IR meetings. So I went to the meeting in New Zealand for APNIC. I'm obviously here. I'm going to the LACNIC meeting and then to the RIPE meeting in Copenhagen and then to the AFRINIC meeting in Botswana, because it's important for us to engage the community and to work together.
Yes, go ahead. Milton?
John, a question about PTI. As you know, better than perhaps many of us, the problem with the names community was that it was essentially trying to contract with itself when it came to the IANA functions, and this whole idea of separability was difficult to achieve in that environment. Now, what we thought was one of the big successes of the transition was that we pulled IANA out of ICANN into a separate organization, a legally separate organization, without making it completely independent, although some of us advocated that. However, some of us felt that was a bit undermined when the address registries and the IETF decided to continue contracting directly with ICANN because of the economies of scale and sort of having all the IANA functions in a single entity. And the arguments that you made at the time as to why you were doing that were very good, in the sense that you'd be contracting with something that had no track record, didn't exist yet, and so on. But down the road, can you see, as PTI becomes more established, can you see fitting in better with the model and having the numbers community contract with PTI instead of with ICANN?
So Milton, if you think about it, early on, the CRISP team came up with a proposal, and the RIR executives were not on the CRISP team. It was members from each of the regions that were appointed that served on it. They came up with a model, and the model said, well, if the goal is to replace NTIA's contract for the number portion of that contract, then the easiest mechanism to put in place is another contract, but for the same thing with the same entity. So, in fact, the first few versions of the SLA actually had the entire NTIA IANA functions contract as an addendum for reference, because they wanted to make sure they covered everything in the present contract. So, when we were busy finalizing and cleaning up this, it makes perfect sense for the RIRs to contract with ICANN because it's presently delivering the service. And it's also the entity, by the way, that has financial resources. If you contract with a wholly owned subsidiary that has no actual resources and no performance record, and it fails to deliver, it actually has no resources with which to put in jeopardy. You literally have contracted with a paper tiger. And right now, all the financial reserves that we would need, for example, if we needed help transitioning or if we needed to assert damages, are all held by ICANN, not PTI. So there was no reason to change what the community specified. There were good reasons not to change what the community specified. And while I recognize it poses some challenges for the name community, which is simultaneously organized by ICANN, contracting with ICANN, and using the IANA services of ICANN, that doesn't seem to be the number of the IETF's problem. I actually know of someone who proposed a model that might have clarified this. So early on in the CWG effort, there was a proposal for, like the IETF, a distinct entity, or the RIRs collectively as a distinct entity, that there be a distinct entity for the names community. And if you had that, it could do something really innovative. It could contract with ICANN, just like the other two communities. That proposal, it was one of the professors of, I can't remember, economics. Who gave that? Actually, it was you, Milton, who made that proposal. Unfortunately, that wasn't the path taken. So I'm sorry that the output is convoluted, but it is a self-inflicted injury on the communities that are not self-organized.
Well, but all of the arguments you made are absolutely correct about the short term, but I'm saying 5 years down the road, or PTI has been performing and effectively it's a subsidiary of ICANN, why would you contemplate contracting with it rather than with ICANN?
We have someone at the mic. Would you like to speak to that?
I think it would be reasonable to consider.
Name and affiliation?
Bill Woodcock, ARIN board. I think it would be reasonable to consider all potential service offers, and it would be particularly reasonable if they can see their way to charging less than the $300,000 per transaction that ICANN charges us right now.
Okay, we have another front and center microphone. Name and affiliation.
Owen DeLong, Akamai, ARIN AC. There would have to be some benefit to contracting with PTI, and the only aspect of the numerous reasons not to that would change over the course of those years, as I understand it from your description, would be they'd go from having no track record to having a track record, but really the track record would just be that ICANN happened to continue to perform, and PTI didn't have to do anything to ICANN to get them to perform. So I'm not sure it's a meaningful track record, no matter how long it lasts. No, I don't see any benefit to doing that. I don't see any improvement that comes from that. And I think, as John described it, PTI is a self-inflicted wound on the part of the names community.
Just to clarify that, so my understanding is ICANN is going to subcontract the contract from the registries to PTI. So, and that PTI will consist of the current IANA department that has simply been moved into a different building and incorporated as a California public benefit. So it's going to be the same people. It's just that I think John rightly says in the current environment, if you want legal certainty and accountability, you have to contract directly with ICANN. But 5 years down the road, I don't see why that would be the case. But I don't see why you'd oppose it either.
Yes, I think it's if you want legal certainty and accountability, since accountability was part of this process, it's the path we took. That's literally one of the key words we were seeking, and so that's why we ended up that way. Vin, you wanted to respond.
Yeah, it's Vince Cerf, Google. Milton, I think that as long as PTI is a wholly owned subsidiary of ICANN, I see no utility in contracting directly with it. If at such a time as ICANN can't perform its function under our contract with them, and this function needs to be replaced by something other than PTI because for some reason PTI is not operating adequately, at that point, then it's a very different ballgame. But I don't see any utility, frankly, in contracting with a subsidiary.
Okay, front center mic, Alan.
Hello, this is Alan Barrett from Afrinic. On the issue of economies of scale and the advantage of putting all three branches of the IANA functions in the same organization, I think that is the plan. We expect PTI to do all three parts of the IANA function, names, numbers, and protocol parameters. Even though the contracts will be in different places, we expect the work all to be in PTI, and we do expect to get those economies of scale. Thanks.
Back microphone.
Yeah, thank you. This is Sheon. So I went back to my seat after Vince made a comment, but I thought I should also come back and say something. I think we need to clarify that ICANN having PTI as a subsidiary, ICANN still remains the sole member of PTI. So just to buttress what Vint has said, that it really makes no practical advantage if you actually contract with the junior instead of contracting with the senior. Thank you.
Understood. Would you like to respond, Ron or Milton? Oh.
So, Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire NAC. I have a question for the panel. Yesterday, Kathy Aronson did a very great job describing an RFC to completely stop working on IPv4. In a similar vein, when can we look back on the IANA transitions in gleefully having been completed and done, and what realistic timeline versus, I realize that each person might have a different expectation, but realistically, When do we expect this to sort of close out?
Milton, would you like to answer that?
It's supposed to be finished September 30th, 2016. That's when the current contract expires, and if it goes beyond that, then you get into potentially another American presidential administration, which could, quite apart from what you think of the politics of any of the candidates, there's just a gap in these transition periods where nothing much happens, and people are afraid to do anything. So you really want to get it done by the end of 2016.
Ben, would you like to respond?
You meant, of course, by the end of fiscal 2016, yes?
Right, September 30th is the end
September
of the
30th.
U.S. fiscal year.
Right.
That's when the NTIA can actually do it.
Right. But, well, except for one thing, the Congress has reserved the right to comment on this thing. And so it's not 100% clear to me whether or not the sitting Congress in the U.S. will actually respond, even though it said it needed only 30 congressional days. I've noticed that this Congress is remarkably recalcitrant. For example, it doesn't want to consider a new Supreme Court appointee, and the committee that's responsible for that has asserted it refuses to consider anyone will refuse to meet. So there's some high risk here that that September 30 date may not transpire if this Congress fails to consider the proposal in a timely way.
Why, I'm surprised that Vint is so gloomy about these things. I think there's every evidence that there's bipartisan support for the transition within the Congress. There, as I said, some nationalist Republicans who are raising questions, but they're not actively opposing it yet, as far as I know, and they seem to be in a minority. But I think this is not a Supreme Court justice appointment in this, those people who have major ideological divisions on abortion or various other critical issues in U.S. politics know that whoever you appoint to the Supreme Court is going to tip the court. It's not clear that the IANA transition tips anything in any way that favors Republicans or Democrats. So I wouldn't be making that parallel unless you are more deeply pessimistic about American politics than even I am.
So, well, I have to say, after watching the campaign in the U.S., I've been looking for property in Montreal. Of course, the recent Canadian elections make me think maybe I should move here to the Caribbean. So now that I've insulted everyone in the room. So Milton, I think the worry I have is that there are a bunch of tactics that are possible especially within the Senate, to stop legislation and stop decisions from happening. And I think my worry is that there is a high element of politics behind all this. The rhetoric that you hear inflates this whole thing into a campaign-like altitude, even though I agree it shouldn't be there. But when people are playing politics, they'll take any excuse they can find. So I think there's really work to be done. I would not be relaxed about trying to make sure that this decision actually happens in a timely way.
One thing to add there is that legislation is not necessary for this to happen. The little rider law that I mentioned does not actually require, it does prevent the NTIA through the funding leverage from doing anything until the end of the fiscal year. And if that were renewed, yes, that could happen. If there's a remote possibility that something like that could happen. But unless you believe that the root zone is government property, which is an argument that we've, I think, pretty much shot down. If you look at the IGP blog or some other places, we've taken that and eviscerated that argument. But so unless it's government property, you don't need congressional approval to transfer the control of it. It looks just like a contract to me. I think that's pretty much what it is. And if the NTIA doesn't renew the contract, then it's done. I'm
sorry, we probably have to do this over a beer or something. But the thing is, the current arrangement says that the Congress gets to look at and consider. I mean, the present agreement, it says they get to look at and consider for a period of 30 days. The problem is that they didn't promise at the end of 30 days that they would say yes. And so that's the part that I think is still at risk.
Back rear microphone.
Okay, thank you. This is Sean again. I just have two questions to the NROEC. The first is is the NROEC considering putting up a statement sometime in future, especially if there is a delay in the supposed, if political activity is taking up the process, and it seems that the September 30th is not going to be realistic anymore, does the NROEC or the IR community, will they be considering perhaps putting up a statement that this is something that needs to be done, and we need, yeah.
I believe your question is, what would the NROEC do if the determination was made that the transition wasn't going to happen? Would we contract and proceed in any case?
That's my that's my second question.
Okay.
That is my second question. So the first is that do you?
Let me help, because I've got the headset on, and I can hear you better than he can. This is great. The deaf guy hears better than everybody. So the question is whether or not, if it looked like this whole thing would not be approved by the Congress, is there any action that the NROEC would consider taking in order to cope with that? And then the next question is, well, would you do a contract anyway somehow?
Understood. So recognize that you have attributed power to the NROEC that doesn't exist. The NROEC is actually 5 executives getting together, trying to make sure that their staff work and play nice, and also trying to make sure that the numbers only show up in one RIR at a time. And so we don't get to do anything that our boards don't tell us to do, or that our boards have told us to listen to you and you haven't told us to do. And so the issue you raise is something that, short of each RIR board making a determination to do something, there would not be a coordinated effort. I will say that it's important to remember something. ICANN has been doing a great job providing the IANA functions, a great job. That was confirmed by, in this process, it was reiterated, it's in the CRISP team plan itself. And if this transition doesn't happen, ICANN will continue to do its job. If this transition does happen, ICANN will continue to do its job. You'll note the sentences aren't any different. It's very hard to say there's an urgent and pressing emergency regarding whether this happens or not. Now, if it turns out that this does not happen for some reason, some of that would depend on what the reason is. But I would be talking to the ARIN board going, here's some things we can or cannot consider. Here's some messaging we can send. Here's some people we can talk to. And we would talk to the other RIRs about that as well. But it wouldn't be a crisis that something's happening. It would be a, oh wow, we put in thousands of hours of work as a community, tens of thousands, I believe, and we're not getting an output. Would be a very, very significant event, but it wouldn't in and of itself be something that would require action before September 30th. What it would require is us to figure out, are we willing to go through this some more? Do we need to begin looking at other measures? It's not something you would ever have the NROEC decide. It's something that each RIR community, your board at ARIN, your board at AFRINIC, the board at ARIN, they would be weighing in to decide what's next here.
Yeah,
I see an ARIN board member. Go ahead, do you want to continue, Sean?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. By saying NROEC, I definitely understand that you have to go through the community, but I'm just referring to the signature. Because you guys signed the letters, right?
Yeah, exactly. Understood. Bill.
I was just going to say that, the first time this question came up was about a year ago when it started to become apparent that we weren't necessarily on track to make all of the deadlines and that that wasn't our fault and that we were done with our part. And there have been several opportunities since then to take unilateral action, and that the community, the numbers community as a whole has been unable to muster the agreement to do so. And while personally I think that's very unfortunate, I don't see that changing. So the general attitude that, yes, well, the US government will get around to this eventually, we'll just wait for them, seems to be the one carrying the day, and I don't see that changing.
And to pick up on what Bill said, a lot of that, Sean, also relies on what happens. If there's a delay because there's an assessment being done and something's happening to that effect, then it is what it is. If the answer is you need operational experience and all these new changes, because at least one organization, ICANN, is going through some changes as a result of this, you could see the need that maybe you need operational experience with the new structures. There's things that would be, we're moving ahead at a, some might say, excessively slow and prudent rate, but still moving ahead. That would need to be discussed by the community. A different discussion would be, no, having looked at this, having said we'll do it for the last 20 years, we've said now, no, we're not going to do it, and the current structures shall remain in perpetuity. That would probably lead to a different discussion. So we can't respond to what not getting it done by September 30th is until we know the nature of what happens and why that delay or why that stop is happening. Understood? Okay, thank you. Any other comments, last comments from the panelists?
I just want to say that I don't think there are any unilateral options. I don't see that being an option. It's not like people don't want that. If there were a unilateral option, we would have exercised it a year or 2 years ago. But there's a contract with the U.S. government. When John Postel tried to take unilateral action in 1998, he was visited by the FBI, so the rumor has it. So I think we just have to go through this process, and I'm not as pessimistic about this. I think the delays we're having are mostly about getting the stakeholders to agree on what needs to happen, and then the U.S. government will pretty much approve what everybody is in favor of, and if they don't, there will be serious international consequences, and I just don't see the support for disrupting this process at this stage.
Excellent. Ron, go ahead. Last comments?
I certainly appreciate some of the sentiment around the risk that the U.S. government could not act or act differently. But I think absent that, I mean, it's certainly something that the industry can't necessarily control, maybe impact, maybe affect, but not control. I am happy to commend the industry as a whole that in spite of all those risks and, or perceived risks, that we have still moved forward with an agenda. We've still moved forward with the process. We're on track. We're on schedule. This is, you know, without any other foreign intervention, it should be done.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to take a chance to thank my fellow panelists, Ron and Milton.